Russia occupied 0.01% of Ukraine in March. The Russian invasion of Ukraine by Kings in General. Let's go. If you want to go see bonus content, early week reactions or extra clips, go to our Patreon, links in the description box down below.
In the second half of March, trends of the previous several weeks continued.
Okay.
The Russian army kept attacking in the Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Mariinka and Vuhledar sections and along the North Luhansk front with varying degrees of success. We have observed more Western military pledges arriving in Ukraine as the Ukrainian army prepares for a crucial counter-offensive. The Chinese efforts to assert itself as a global geopolitical player and a neutral power broker in the war in Ukraine also continued. Welcome to another update on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as we are about to enter a potentially decisive phase of the war. The latest news out of Russia is their potential annexation of Belarus. If it becomes a reality, it will have dire effects, preloaded with special access. The Donbass front continues to be the primary focus of the Russian Grand Offensive, as the attempts of the Russian army to gain meaningful success in the Vuhledar section of the Zaporizhia front and along the North Luhansk front failed. The only reported notable gain of the Russian army in these battlefield sections was achieved by the LPR motorized brigade, which advanced closer to Sperna. On the Zaporizhia front,
it doesn't look much
the Ukrainian army conducted several more reconnaissance attacks towards Polohi, and according to Russian sources, they gained some ground in that section. Given the increased intensity of combat around Polohi, one may think that the Ukrainian command has identified this section as an area which may be penetrated in the upcoming counter-offensive.
So this is where they
or it simply may be a feint to draw more Russian units into the area and strike somewhere else. We shall see.
Okay, that's a good point.
But
Could be a diversion.
Donbass, where most of the combat occurred in this period. Even though the Wagner Group and the 106th Guards Air Assault Division failed to make a decisive breakthrough to solve the Bakhmut gauntlet for good, they continued making progress in and around the city. On March 16th, they pushed back the 30th Mechanized Brigade to capture Zaliznianska, along with getting closer to Kromova. By March 18th, Wagner mercenaries reached the center of Bakhmut from the south, along with pushing the 67th Mechanized Brigade to gain further ground towards Bodenivka in the following days. On March 22nd,
pincer movement's becoming more and more of a threat in Bakhmut. The Ukrainians are going to have to retreat from there soon.
On March 23rd, Wagner groups pushed closer towards Ivaniska in the south of the city, along with crossing the Batmatovka River and creating a bridgehead to strengthen the city center. Since then, the Ukrainian army has managed to stabilize the situation in the Bakhmut section as the intensity of Russian attacks has somewhat decreased. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief, Zaluzhny, has stated that the Ukrainian army has stabilized the situation in Bakhmut thanks to their titanic work. Ukrainian army officials have claimed that the Russian army has been reinforcing Wagner with regular army units to complete the capture of Bakhmut. The situation is becoming increasingly complicated for both sides. Ukraine has continued to lose ground in Bakhmut and around the MO3 highway leading to Slovyansk. The only supply line controlled by the Ukrainian army is the TO-504, which is targeted by Russian artillery. Wagner had already crossed the river, which was the final natural barrier within the city lines, to advance to the center of Bakhmut. Many military commentators believe that since Bakhmut is not on any natural elevation, it is more logical to withdraw towards the northwest, which has a high ground advantageous for the defensive side. They argue that the ratio of losses is not as advantageous to the Ukrainian army as it could be in a more favorable area.
What do you guys think?
But others claim that the Ukrainian army has largely absorbed the main brunt of the Russian offensive potential in Bakhmut and has significantly diminished it in battles that have been very intensive in the past 3 to 4 months. British intelligence claims that almost 20% of all Russian losses since the summer of 2022 have been suffered in the Bakhmut section.
That's a nice big chunk.
A Ukrainian serviceman has told the New York Times that their goal since the beginning of the year has been to hold Bakhmut until April, while the commander of the Ukrainian land forces, General Syrsky, claimed that the Russians have almost exhausted their offensive potential, and that the Ukrainian army will soon capitalize on this.
Okay,
Some analysts
nice.
argue
Let's see if
that
they can
Ukraine may actually
capitalise on
start
it.
its counter-offensive, which is set to be launched in April to May, according to the Ukrainian Defense Minister Reznikov, in Bakhmut, where the Russians may have exposed their flanks. The chief of Wagner, Prigozhin, also warned about Bakhmut as a potential section of the Ukrainian counter-offensive. At this point, all of that is assumptions and speculation, and we will see if the Russian army manages to capture Bakhmut before the Ukrainians launch their counter-offensive in the upcoming couple of months. Ukrainian President Zelensky has also chimed in about the potential political consequences of the fall of Bakhmut. He said that the loss of Bakhmut would allow Putin to sell this as a victory to the Russian public, along with the Ukrainian and international community, who may push him to concede to unacceptable terms dictated
in whatever
by Putin.
way he can.
It is evident that the Ukrainian political leadership wants to avoid any political defeats, which can turn the mood of the international community against supporting Ukraine and decrease the motivation of the Ukrainian public to fight on.
Okay, it's understandable. I get where he's coming from.
And then
In the previous video, we noted the increased intensity of fighting in the Avdiivka section of the Donbass front. In the second half of March, the Russian army was so active there that some military analysts argued that Russia had actually switched its primary focus from Bakhmut to Avdiivka.
They just have enough men to make
capture this heavily fortified town just outside
potential
Donetsk
threats on
since
two
2014,
fronts.
and then since the start of the full-scale war, and are giving it another try now. The advantage of the Ukrainians is that they have formidable defensive structures in this area, while the Russians can capitalize on the fact that the Avdiivka section is mostly flat, has limited tree lines, and only a single supply line leading to the town. They have been trying to capture this road in this period, and have moved from the north and the south to put the Ukrainian 53rd Mechanized Brigade and the 70th Separate Infantry Battalion under an operational encirclement. By March 16th, the evidence of the capture of Krasnohorivka in the north of Avdiivka by the DPR units and units consisting of Russian mobilized soldiers has emerged. They continued their offensive with an assault towards Stepova in the north and Sieverna in the south, gaining some ground by March 20th. The Ukrainian command later stated that several Wagner units, consisting not of inmates but of professional operatives, had been deployed to Avdiivka, which may indicate the significance of this section for the Russian army. While Bakhmut and Avdiivka remained the main focus of the Russian army in Donbass, they also made minor progress inside Mariinka.
Oh, okay.
Even though Russia is making gains in Donbass, obviously the aspirations of their currently ongoing offensive were much bigger. We can safely assume this based on their so far failed offensive operations in the Vuhledar section and along the North Luhansk front. And the worst news for Russia is that they are expending their remaining offensive potential, which Russian industry is in no position to compensate for immediately. In this period, Russia started removing Stalin-era T-54-55 tanks from storage and deploying them to Ukraine. Russia has vast reserves of these tanks. Some will be modernized before being sent to Ukraine, but their effectiveness in modern warfare is going to be very low. According to The Economist, Russia's only tank production factory, Uralvagonzavod, produces only 20 tanks per month. Russia loses many more than 20 tanks per month, thus they would have to go deeper into their old tank reserves to compensate. Russia is losing a lot of manpower in Ukraine, and reportedly seeking to send more than 400,000 soldiers to the battlefield. According to Bloomberg, Putin is reluctant to declare the second wave of mobilization before the upcoming presidential election in 2024. Therefore, the Kremlin may look for alternative ways to recruit more men for Ukraine by creating volunteer battalions, encouraging people to sign military contracts, and creating new mercenary organizations like the Convoy Group created by the Russian-appointed governor of Crimea, Aksionov. Still, it is very unlikely that Russia will manage to recruit another 400,000 men to fight in Ukraine without ordering another mobilization. The morale of the Russian leadership, military command, and people is not improving either. The dismissal of the commander responsible for the disastrous Vuhledar offensive, General Rustam Muradov, the continued power struggle between Prigozhin and the Russian MOD, Putin's unannounced trip to Crimea and Mariupol, and his decision to deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus have done nothing to boost morale. The latter of these is particularly notable from the perspective of the much anticipated visit of the Chinese leader Xi Jinping to Russia on March 20th and 21st. A day before that, both Putin and Xi published their articles on the vision of Sino-Russian relations, in which both leaders praised the friendship between the countries, increased economic ties, and called for a multipolar world order.
Interesting.
The difference is that Putin was much more anti-Western in his article, blaming the West and NATO for the war in Ukraine, while Xi focused on the Chinese peace plan in a bid to strengthen China's position as a mediator in this war. During their meeting in Moscow, Putin and Xi lavished praise on each other, reiterating their interest in the comprehensive deepening of relations between their countries, while the Russian president also stated that he is acquainted with the Chinese peace plan and is always open to negotiations.
Okay.
In their joint statement, the countries also stated that all nuclear weapon states should refrain from deploying nuclear weapons abroad. But a few days later, Putin announced his intention to station Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus.
Went back on that
This is clearly
straight
at odds
away.
with Chinese wishes for nuclear de-escalation.
Evidently,
Evidently, Putin did not get what he wanted from Xi's visit to Moscow. Therefore, he was comfortable with reneging on the joint statement. Putin wanted pledges of military support from China, but did not get any.
Yep.
Therefore, the results of Xi's visit fell way short of the Kremlin's expectations. A few days before this visit, Western media outlets reported about small-scale military supplies sold by Chinese companies to Russia. This included rifles, body armor, and drone parts sold to Russia between June and December 2022. While this is the first claim of Chinese military equipment being sent to Russia, their scale is very small and was done not by the Chinese government but by Chinese companies. Chinese military production companies would not sell their produce to Russia without the government's permission, but they have probably made sure that the trail does not lead to the Chinese government to protect it from sanctions.
Alright, I see.
Also, the scale of supplies and their types are curious.
Yeah,
Russia does not have documented problems with rifles, and one may wonder why the sides would be interested in such a transaction.
I see you. You haven't liked the video yet. Why not? Go on, go like it. While you're at it, you know you want to subscribe. And if you want to go to our social medias, all the links you need are in the description box down below. And you might as well head over to our Patreon as well, where you can get extra bonus content if you're enjoying this. That link's in the description box down below. But we'll get straight back into the video. Love you guys.
There have been no other reports of Chinese military support to Russia. But according to British intelligence, Russia and Iran may have agreed on the regular supply of Shahed drones in small numbers. Russia is interested in this to continue attacking Ukrainian cities and launched Shahed drones on March 16th, 22nd,
I remember
and 28th.
reading about it. They've got them.
It is interesting that according to
Ukrainian
Ukrainian military intelligence, Russia may be focusing on attacking Ukrainian military infrastructure instead of energy infrastructure, since pursuing the latter effectively requires very frequent strikes. Russia has not been able to keep up with its pace of strikes from late 2022, probably due to diminishing reserves of its cruise missiles.
So what are we going to do then? What are these fucking adverts, man?
What about the Ukrainian army? We already mentioned Reznikov's statement about the Ukrainian counter-offensive starting in April to May 2023, depending on the weather. Politico has also claimed that Ukraine's counter-offensive will be launched in May, pointing out two potential axes of advance for the Ukrainian army. One is the march on the Azov Sea, to cut Crimea off from the rest of the Russian
Surely
controlled
having this
territory,
much information
while
is
the
not
other
good
is
for the
from
Russians.
Kherson
The Russians
across
can
the
get
river
this
Dnipro
information
to
as well
Crimea.
if it's out.
While
Or
the
is
first
this,
option is the
like,
most commonly
distraction?
anticipated one, the second is tricky due to challenges caused by needing to cross the Dnipro and establish a bridgehead on its left bank. But it is a high-risk, high-reward scenario. If Ukraine manages to do that, it will have a shorter route to Crimea. One Russian military blogger certainly thinks this will be the case. According to him, regular battles have occurred on small islands in the Dnipro. The West has been sending a large number of military speedboats to Ukraine, while the Ukrainian army units have been urging volunteers in Ukraine to supply them with life jackets. He believes these are all indicators of preparation for a large offensive from Kherson on Crimea, which Russia is preparing for by building fortifications along the Dnipro. Wagner boss Prigozhin argues that the Ukrainians are preparing to attack in 5 different axes: into the Belgorod Oblast of Russia, in the Crimea section, in the Bakhmut section, towards Donetsk, and in the Zaporizhia Oblast.
That's too much.
It does not seem likely that Ukraine has enough resources
Yeah,
to
there's
launch
no
5
way.
full-scale separate assaults. But they can certainly attempt several probing attacks and capitalize on the most successful ones to develop them. Prigozhin particularly focuses on Bakhmut, as he argues that Ukraine has 80,000 troops in the Bakhmut-Slovyansk area, preparing for an imminent counter-offensive there.
Is that true,
This
or is
may
he
be
just
true,
trying to...
or it may be Prigozhin's attempt to leverage the Russian MOD to supply more
I think
artillery shells
I
to
think he's
Wagner.
trying to get leverage.
It is necessary to mention that not everyone is making immediate promises of a successful counter-offensive by Ukraine. For instance, in his interview with the Japanese press, Zelensky stated that the Ukrainian army cannot start the counter-offensive now due to a lack of weapons. This may have been done to push the Western allies to expedite the delivery of certain weapons and armored vehicles to Ukraine.
Okay.
On March 30th, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba urged everyone to curb their enthusiasm with regard to the counter-offensive and stop viewing it as a decisive battle. He warned that if Ukraine fails to launch a successful counter-offensive, the positions of Western officials in favor of a compromise with Russia will become stronger. His message is of patience and cautioning against putting all proverbial eggs in the same basket for the upcoming counter-offensive.
Alright.
Still, Ukraine's allies continued bolstering its offensive and defensive capabilities with their military assistance.
As they
On
always
March
do.
16th, Axios reported that Israel agreed to sell anti-drone systems to Ukraine, which are supposedly effective against Shahed drones. On the same day, Ukraine started receiving some Soviet-made jets from its allies. Poland delivered 4 MiG-29 fighter jets, while Slovakia approved transferring 13 of them to Ukraine.
Okay.
This was followed by Su-25 jets from North Macedonia, who also reportedly decided to deliver 12 Mi-24 helicopters. There has not been much rumbling about Western-made jets to be delivered to Ukraine, apart from a rumor that France intends to purchase 40 Mirage 2009 4th-generation fighter jets for Ukraine. If the West
that'd
is
be
really
interesting.
planning to deliver modern fighter jets to Ukraine, it has to think faster. It has been reported that Russia has been using its Su-35 fighter jets more often in Ukraine, which is making a difference. Ukraine cannot afford to concede air superiority to Russia on the eve of its offensive. In
No,
this period,
if it
some of
concedes
the
air
earlier pledged Western
superiority-
tanks and armored vehicles continued
You know
arriving
what I
in
mean.
Ukraine.
That's it. It's game over.
First, AMX-10RC
you
French
control the
infantry
skies, you
fighting
win the war.
vehicles, 30 Onsala armored personnel carriers, 18 Leopard 2 tanks, and almost 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles pledged by Germany and Challenger 2 tanks pledged by Britain have already arrived in Ukraine. The EU has also promised Ukraine 1 million 155mm shells within the next 12 months. The USA promises HIMARS munitions, HARM missiles, anti-tank weapons, and the aforementioned military speed.
The shells, is that the same from the last video? How much of this is the same from the last video? That's my question. Because I know when we go over the vehicle losses at the side in the brackets, we have the additional. I wish they done that for the aid they're getting, because we're in the same month of March. So yeah, are the packages from this video the same as last video?
Speedboats in the latest military assistance package worth
Because the
$350
speedboats seem
million.
new. I haven't seen those before.
Promises Leopard
Or
2
have I?
tanks, Archer self-propelled artillery systems, and Robot System 97 missile systems as part of a military aid package worth $600 million. It has also been reported that the Ukrainian Military Manufacturing Corporation, Ukroboronprom, has started producing shells with an unspecified NATO member state. While
Interesting.
Slovakia and Germany have agreed to conduct maintenance of Ukrainian Panzerhaubitze 2000 howitzers in the territory of Slovakia. The notable development is that according to Der Spiegel, the German government intends to increase military assistance to Ukraine from 3 billion euros to a massive 15 billion euros.
Whoa.
One of the notable developments regarding international support of Ukraine in this period was the decision of the Pentagon to send the older version of Abrams, M1A1, to Ukraine. This is reportedly
They're
done
pledged,
to speed
but they
up
haven't
the delivery
arrived.
of these tanks. as Abrams M1A1 can be delivered in 8 to 9 months, while initially pledged M1A2s may take a couple of years to arrive in Ukraine. It is necessary to note that the pledged M1A1s are the modernized versions.
Okay.
In the second half of March, Ukraine also received 1.5 billion euros of financial aid from the EU, while the IMF agreed on a $15.6 billion loan package for Ukraine, which it would not have to start repaying until 2027.
You do gotta wonder where all the money's going. You know, it's a lot of money being thrown over here. It's needed, the equipment's needed, but the money is insane to me.
Lastly, we should briefly talk about the statement from Britain about the provision to Ukraine of munitions with depleted uranium, which has a higher penetration power against armor. Depleted uranium is way different from enriched uranium, which is used for the production of nuclear weapons, has way lower radioactivity, and is suitable for conventional military use. But Russia used this opportunity to create a narrative that the West is providing dirty bombs to Ukraine, and announced its aforementioned decision to station nuclear weapons in Belarus in retaliation.
So they just needed a pretext to deploy their nukes in Belarus.
Before touching upon the biggest development on the diplomatic front in this period, let's briefly note that the grain deal was extended on March 18th, despite Russian claims that their demands had not been made. Still, Russia is not looking for a diplomatic solution to the war. The Russian MFA spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, reiterated the maximalist position set at the beginning of the war, which demands demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, and international recognition of new territorial realities. At least on the level of official statements, Russia does not seem flexible to engage in any talks, as Putin arguably believes that his army can still overpower Ukraine on the battlefield.
How long can that last for?
But the biggest
It's
recent
still
news
going
on the
on now,
international
today
level
in 2020.
came on March 17th,
28th
when
of
the
December.
International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin for alleged war crimes relating to the forceful deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. All countries that have ratified the Rome Statute of the ICC are obliged to arrest Putin if he steps on their soil. While this does
I
not
wondered
have
about
an
this when
immediate
it came
tangible
out.
impact, since Putin is already quite isolated diplomatically, it puts him on the same list as the likes of Gaddafi and al-Bashir. Putin's spokesperson Peskov called this decision outrageous and unacceptable, but also played down its significance. But former Russian President Medvedev was way more bellicose and went on his usual nuclear spiel, threatening the ICC with a missile strike. The economies of the warring states continue suffering as the war drags on. According to Bloomberg, Russia is spending an unsustainable third of its state budget on the war, while its energy share in the EU market continues plummeting. Currently, the Russian share of oil exports on the EU market dropped from 31% to 4%. But Ukraine is not doing any better either.
Yeah, I'd bet.
According to the Minister of Finance, Marchenko, Ukraine is spending 130 billion hryvnias monthly on the war, while the budget revenues are only 80 billion monthly. This is not sustainable either,
Nope.
and Ukraine relies on Western financial aid to continue supporting its war effort. According to The Guardian's source in Russia, during a party in December 2022, Peskov told the guests that the war would last a long time. At least this is the intention of Putin, as he does not seem to really care about losses suffered during the war. According to the BBC, the total number of Russian losses in this war may have exceeded 211,500 people. There have been no recent claims of Ukrainian losses.
I don't really
According
trust
to
the
the Oryx
BBC
blog,
either.
the visually confirmed equipment losses for
Here we
Russia
go.
as of March
This I
31st
believe.
are 1,906 tanks, 3,925 vehicles, 236 command posts and communication stations, 659 artillery
Ukrainians are
systems
always,
and vehicles,
the Russians are always
190
losing
multiple
more
rocket
compared
launchers,
to the Ukrainians.
78 aircraft, 80 helicopters, and 207 drones. For Ukraine, these are 489 tanks,
See, look,
1,411
big
vehicles,
but then maybe the
9
Ukrainians
command
aren't
posts and
deploying
communication
nearly as
stations,
many as the Russians are.
274 artillery systems and vehicles, 40 multiple rocket launchers, 62 aircraft,
lost a lot
30
of artillery
helicopters,
pieces
and
this time.
93 drones. Over the month of March, Russia increased the area of land they control in Ukraine by approximately 70 square kilometers. This equates to a total of 16.68% of Ukraine being occupied by Russian forces, a 0.01% increase since the end of February.
There's such little gains. Such little gains. It's just such a slugfest, this whole war.
We are working on more videos on the topic, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them.
I hope you guys are subscribed to their channel and you've got their bell icon here. You know I have. If you haven't, then head over to their page. That link's in the description box down below. If you enjoyed my reaction, looking forward to future reactions, you know what you need to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will catch you in the next video.